Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we have news that private auras are coming back in War Within, and they now are affecting some Mythic Plus abilities as well. So this is a thing that's been pushed to the alpha, and it's a few abilities from both the raid and 2 of the 8 dungeons have gained the private aura tag, which, for those who haven't been following private auras in Dragonflight, this is technology that Blizzard have developed that makes it so that it's not possible for your UI or your weak auras to know whether you have been targeted or not by a specific mechanic, or whether you're affected or not by a specific mechanic. You can still see it for yourself, but you see it through your private auras frame, or you can have it be put on your raid frames, but it's done, sort of like clunkily, right? Because it's your add-ons aren't putting it there. You can't just have it. If you have something that changes how different debuffs are displayed on your raid frames, you don't have that level of customization available with it. But the goal is to prevent you from being able to use like assignment weak auras, that kind of stuff, with these mechanics. Now, I've talked a lot about the Dragonflight private auras situation where they only existed in raid, and there were about 20 mechanics that were placed as private auras, mostly in Amirdrasil, a few in Aberrus. Most of them were, I would say, fine. I don't think there would have been assignment weak auras for most of them or anything like that. And a few of them, Seeking Inferno on Smolderon Mythic, Volcanic Heart on Echo of Neltharion Mythic, and Flamebound and Shadowbound, as well as Shadow Cage and Molten Eruption on Fireact Mythic, were still assignment weak aura'd, and they were just done through a macro bypass of these mechanics, where you would get targeted by a mechanic. It was a private aura, so your weak auras couldn't see whether you had it or not, and then you would see that you had it, and so you would press a macro, and then you'd have a weak aura that was reading everybody in your raid. When you press this macro, it would send a message to a private channel, and then the weak aura would be like, oh, okay, these 10 people sent this message to this private channel. These 10 people, therefore, are the people who have Flamebound. I can assign everybody in the raid now, knowing which ones have Flamebound, which ones have Shadowbound, to their specific positions around Fireact, and bang, we have a mechanic that is equally as solved with a weak aura as one that wasn't a private aura, except now the gameplay is pressing a macro and troubleshooting a weak aura, and then doing a mechanic solved by a weak aura, instead of just doing a mechanic solved by a weak aura. And there's a lot of angst amongst players who, like myself, find that it really makes the game a lot worse for us when there are mechanics that are troubleshoot a weak aura, press a macro. Like, those steps are really, really unfun. And we haven't gotten rid of the doing a mechanic solved by a weak aura part either, which I think everybody agrees is an admirable thing to aim for. So private auras going into War Within, hopefully they maybe have made some progress on preventing us from just all using macros to solve any mechanics that need it, because so far, every mechanic that's been a weak aura, or that's been a private aura, either wouldn't have needed a weak aura anyways, probably. There are maybe some examples like Blaze or Rending Charge even, where Rending Charge was on Forgotten Experiments. It would choose 3 people, and it would be like, okay, I'm charging between these 3 people, and maybe if you had a weak aura, it would tell you to, it would give you a world marker to go stand on, right? And you put down 3 world markers, they'd form a little triangle, and you would just have the 3 people go and stand on certain world markers, and now instead they kind of have to YOLO spread and like look at how the charge is going. So maybe that mechanic was slightly improved by being a private aura. Maybe Blaze on Fireact, although Blaze on Fireact has highlighted further problems that exist with private auras, further workarounds that exist for them, such as, like, you can set it up so that you get a different unique sound cue somehow. I don't know exactly how it works, but you can get a different unique sound cue for like each of the Blaze sets. So you could have a sound cue that's like first Blaze, second Blaze, third Blaze, fourth Blaze, fifth Blaze, back when those existed, that could play that sound for you. You could play even, you could have somebody literally say first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and it would you could play that for you on each of the Blazes. So if you wanted to solve that mechanic with some sort of systematic everybody pixel stack, and then people move in certain directions based on which one they got, you could still have done that with that tech. Seeking Inferno on Smolderon for progression for a lot of guilds. It was a private aura, but the orbs fixated on people in a way where you could still therefore see who had aggro, and so you could get around it and solve it that way for a while. They fixed that eventually, but a lot of guilds killed it. effectively without it being a private aura, and the ones that didn't killed it with a macro. My guild, we progged that boss for quite a while trying to YOLO it, and turns out that a macro is both more annoying but also more effective than YOLOing it, so everybody switched to that, including us as soon as we were able to make it work. We were starting on the boss before there were public weak auras for it, so we had to kind of figure it out as we went along, which was, I guess, kind of another drawback of private auras, is that private auras reward guilds that have people that actually can do all that coding and stuff on the back end, because it is more intensive weak aura creation and more like going in and figuring out like, oh yeah, okay, this is actually fixating on the back end. And apparently there are a lot of those types of workarounds that still exist for private auras. I don't want to take too many points off of private auras as a topic because of the fact that workarounds exist for them, because I think that most of those are solvable. The one that maybe isn't is the macro press. I've yet to see a way for them to really fix the macro press issue for these auras. Or Volcanic Heart. Volcanic Heartbeat, absolutely horrendous mechanic on the initial version of Echo of Neltharion, but that wasn't really Private Aura's fault. But maybe somehow Blizzard thought that private auras would make it a good mechanic, when in fact private auras took a mechanic that would have been awful and pretty unfun and made it awfuler and much unfunner. Anyways, this is Phase 2, Echo of Neltharion, Volcanic Hearts. You're in this part of the room, and you have 5 Volcanic Hearts, and if you spread them exactly to these 5 specific points, they don't overlap with each other, and you have this tiny sliver of a safe spot here for the remaining 15 players in the raid to go. Now, the fact that Volcanic Heart was a private aura basically didn't change how you would play this mechanic. You had to do it this way, because otherwise you're overlapping people's Volcanic Hearts. You don't have enough externals and stuff to do that because you're already doing that in other parts of the fight where you have to. You could open a wall with one of the, like, you get a tank mechanic right before this that would let you open a wall, and you could maybe let people run through there, but then you're going to miss the DPS check, you're going to brick your healing check because breaking a wall does a lot of raid damage. So realistically, there was no way, on progression of this encounter to handle this mechanic any way other than spreading to these 5 spots, and you were always going to therefore need to send 5 people to 5 specific spots. This was before the ping system existed, so maybe now you could do it with everybody pinging which spot they're running to, or like spreading in kind of a loose circle around the boss, and then everybody runs to the side that's closest to them when they get a Volcanic Heart. Like, you could maybe do stuff like that, but all of that comes with a DPS loss inefficiency compared to the way that this ended up being solved with private auras, which is, you see this weak aura over here? This weak aura just creates a raid frame that's in a certain list order with like certain specs near the top and others near the bottom, right? And then we would know, like, okay, whichever, you would count down from the top and see how many Volcanic Hearts there were. One melee always got it, so melee just weren't on this list, and you just knew whichever melee got it was position number 5. And then the top person on this list to have a Volcanic Heart, I'm not an orc in this picture, is position 1. Position 2 is the second person with Volcanic Heart. Position 3 is the third. Position 4 is the fourth, right? And they just go to those spots. And you have open on your other monitor, you have your raid plan that is, this is where the boss is. This is where position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 go. And so that mechanic ended up being solved that way. It would have been done pretty much the exact same way if there weren't private auras, except you would have just had a weak aura pop up on your screen instead of having to count down that side list saying 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Which I guess would have been, I guess Blizzard, like, if Blizzard is happy with us doing the list thing instead, because it's like more brain power, I don't like that, because it's much, much more annoying. Like, there are a lot of satisfying mechanics to do in World of Warcraft, right? Over the course of the game's history, there's been a ton of fun YOLO mechanics, and I love those. And I love the idea of Blizzard looking at mechanics and being like, we don't want you to solve this with a weak aura. We're going to try and make it so you YOLO it. But to me, this is a step back. It was Volcanic Heart, right? Volcanic Heart, having a weak aura pop up on your screen, say go to position 1, is not a particularly fun mechanic to do. Volcanic Heart, where it's look at a list at the side of your screen, count down to see which number you are, and then go to that exact corresponding position, is an even worse, right? You don't get the satisfaction of, seeing where you're going, doing a fun YOLO, picking a good spot, reacting to the gameplay. You don't get any of that fun. You just get more busy work, more paperwork. You have a raid plan with all of the different spots on your second screen as you're doing the prog, and you're kind of learning where all these spots are, and just absolute downgrade in terms of mechanic quality of life. And again, we're making a bunch of sacrifices that I think sound like they're worthwhile sacrifices for making it so that you don't solve mechanics systematically or with weak auras, and then we are still solving the mechanics systematically or with weak auras, just in a more annoying way, just by either pressing a macro or looking at a list or something horrific like that for those mechanics. Again, Echo of Neltharion, Fire-Ak, just huge examples of this happening. So, weak auras in War Within. The raid weak auras here, I don't know, or the raid mechanics here, I don't know which of these are important. I don't know how these are going to play. I don't know whether these are going to be like Rending Charge, like Naimu if you're targeted by a Blossom on that fight. But there's just been a bunch of mechanics over the last, mostly in Emirdasil, that have been private auras, right? Like Laridar, if you get Igniting Flame, that's a private aura. Who cares? Everybody in the raid gets it at the same time. It doesn't change anything, right? Maybe these are like that as well, right? Like maybe these are entirely fine to be private auras. Maybe they're even like Blaze or Rending Charge, where they're made slightly better because you don't have a weak aura telling you, hey, move to a position, right? Or you don't have a text box over your head saying, charge on me. Although, any mechanic that would involve having a weak aura over your head that's doing a /say of charge on me, if they want you to not have a weak aura doing that, the mechanic is going to suck unless they make it equally obvious that just over your head there's like a marker that's saying you're being charged, right? Like Rending Charge had. So it's slightly better, I guess, for it to not be a /say bubble, but it's not really better, right? It's pretty much the same idea. So yeah, that's, I guess, my case. My thing for the raid is like, I suspect that these mechanics are made at most 2% better by being private auras, and at worst 700 zillion times worse. And that is always a really worrying place to be. And I hope that they are iterating on private auras, and that they're not just settling into the Emirdasil and Aberrus private aura situation being the status quo, where just, you make a bunch of mechanics private auras, one or two of them absolutely suck for Mythic Raiders, and we're fine with that because that, I don't know, I mean, sure, Mythic Raiders are a small set of the population, but it's not like this is making the game better for Heroic Raiders or normal Raiders either, right? Like, these mechanics being made private auras, it doesn't make the game any better for those people, right? Like, all it means is that you have some mechanics that pop up in your private aura frame instead of the regular frame, or some mechanics that you're, giga 400 kilobyte. I don't even know if that's a lot of kilobytes for a weak aura package, but those massive weak aura packages that just have every mechanic in the raid, those aren't useful, by the way. If you have a weak aura package that just has every single mechanic in the dungeon journal and it just pops up when you have that doesn't help. That weak aura package is bad. You can start with that, but then just turn off every single mechanic once you realize, oh, I don't actually need to know that I have this dot on me that everybody gets all the time. Anyways, side tangent. Heroic Raiders, normal Raiders, LFR Raiders, their lives aren't made better by making anything a private aura. So making Mythic Raiders' lives worse by making one or two awful mechanics either into awful mechanics or into awfuler mechanics with a private aura isn't worth it, right? Like, we talk about this a lot in the game, and I wholeheartedly agree that anytime you get an opportunity to make the game 10% worse for Mythic Raiders and 10% better for everybody else, like, of course you should do that, right? There's way more people in that everybody else bucket. But private auras are a change that pretty much only matters to people doing ultra high coordination content. It's never made a heroic mechanic meaningfully different than it otherwise would have been, right? And so that's not like this isn't one of those cases of like, oh, the game's getting worse for Dratnos, but who cares? That guy's a top 1% raider. Who cares about making it worse for them? It's making it better for us. It's not. It doesn't change anything in the lower difficulties of raid at all. So yeah, these are the mechanics that are being put on private auras. I haven't got enough of a take on what these are happening, but, and something I may have buried the lead a little bit on, they're also adding private auras to dungeons now. Now, this has led to a lot of consternation on X.com, formerly Twitter, which I understand, although I don't actually think it's likely to matter in dungeons. Dungeons just don't tend to have mechanics that are solved by weak auras, or that where weak auras really interact with you having a mechanic, right? Like Dark Orb, for instance, on a noob Ikaj, targets you, it looks at you, it shoots a Dark Orb at you. Your weak aura would just tell you that you have it and maybe play a sound alert. And as we discussed earlier, like, you can already make that still happen with a private aura. So the only difference here is that, like, your healer can't customize how somebody being targeted by Dark Orb looks on their raid frames. But other than that, like, you have the same functionalities that you otherwise would have. I guess maybe you need to go into a folder and set something up if you want to make a sound alert for it. Although I think that's something that may be getting further improved going into War Within. And then rushing on here, Rolling Acid, Spinneret Strands. Like, Rolling Acid is something where somebody gets targeted, they shoot acid either to their left or to their right, and they kind of need to get to either the left or the right of the boat so that they don't shoot a wave of acid across everybody else on the boat. That's also probably not something for which you'd have a weak aura, because I think it's the same ability whether it's going to your left or to the right. So either way, you'd have to look at your character to see whether you need to get to the left or to the right. So my early guess is that these private auras probably don't change anything about these dungeon mechanics. I haven't actually done Darkflame Cleft yet, so I don't know how Throw Darkflame interacts, but it's hard for me to think of a dungeon mechanic where a private aura would really matter. So some would see that as an argument for putting private auras on things. I see it as an argument against, because I don't see any upsides to putting private auras. I don't see private auras here having any potential to save us from solving these things, with a weak aura or systematically. So you're just making it more annoying, right? You're making it show up in your private aura frame instead of your debuff frame. You're making it so that healers can't see it on their raid frames the way that they want to, the way that they've customized their UI. You're making it so that you need to be more like tech savvy to actually set up a sound alert for each of these, but you still can, right? It's not like you can't. It's just that you have to do it in a different way. So like, what's the point here? What are we accomplishing by making these things private auras? My guess is probably nothing, but my guess is that there's probably also not much of a downside here. But I think it's probably like a 10% chance that something gets much worse by being a private aura here, and like a 0.5% chance that something gets better. So for me, that's like a not worth it thing. It's like not looking both ways before crossing the street on a green light, right? Like, you're probably going to be fine. So like, if somebody could make this argument that's like, oh yeah, you do that, you're probably going to be fine. It's like, yeah, but you're not really accomplishing anything. It's not like looking both ways does anything bad. And there might be somebody, zooming down there, running a red light that's gonna crash into you the other way, right? And so it's a case of, I think, very, very little chance of upside, right? You avoid spraining your neck. Is that something you can do? I don't know. I don't look both ways before crossing the street enough, so I wouldn't know. But maybe that's something that could happen if you do it too much, right? You turn your head too much. It's like, my neck, right? That's like a very small chance something bad that you could avoid. But the other bad thing you're avoiding is more likely, still very unlikely, of being rammed into by a car. And that car, in this case, is Volcanic Heart style mechanic somehow existing in a dungeon. But again, I don't think that could really exist in a dungeon. So I don't know. I'm not sure. This is my initial guess on how this is going to work out in War Within. Of course, we're going to have to actually play the expansion to really know for sure. But I'm not like super doomer about these private auras being put into War Within. Like 6 raid mechanics, the odds are probably decent that one of these is made somewhat worse or a lot worse by being a private aura, but I'm not sure. That's just based on numbers from like Amir Still and Aberrus. And the dungeon mechanics, I would guess it's fine. I don't know why, but I don't think it does anything bad probably. Anyways, that's my take. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. I hope I've explained this reasonably well as well. I have some earlier videos on private auras that kind of go through my thoughts on them too. So if you want to look through there, I think I've got a few of them now. So if you just search Dratnos private auras, you can find other videos over the course of them being implemented in Dragonflight. So do that if you'd like some more context, although I think I did a pretty good job of kind of giving the context at the top of this video. So if there's any questions you have about it as well, put them in the comments, upvote any questions that you have, and I'll try and respond to the ones that are at the top at some point in the next day or two. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.